Hello everyone, Mike here, and we are in the middle of JSApril. I've talked about this a little bit here on the channel and on my podcast as well, and it's been a good time. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to see some of the other projects that people have been putting out, if you go on Twitter and look up the hashtag JSApril, you'll find loads of podcasts, blogs, all sorts of stuff related to the Justice Society. Now, the Justice Society, admittedly, I was not into as a kid. To me, they were just like the other versions of the cooler superheroes. This would change as time passed. But then I actually got my hands on a couple of those hardcover DC Golden Age archive collections. And upon actually reading some of the stories about these characters, I found myself really liking them, especially people like Jay Garrick and Alan Scott. But my favorite would have to be Power Girl, whom I've talked about here on the channel before. Just to give you a quick recap, I first discovered her in the Batman Superman Public Enemies movie. And from there, I ended up getting a chance to read the 2009 solo series that she had, and that was what really made me a fan. I loved the characterization of her. I loved the art style, especially with how expressive they made her face. And it really made me want to go back and learn more about the character, who, of course, started out as an Earth 2 character and was part of the Justice Society, which brings us back to where we started. So we're going to be talking some Power Girl. But first, let's take a moment to check out a trailer for another awesome podcast that you should definitely check out.
Worlds would live,
Worlds would die.
and DC Comics would never be the same again.
Crisis on Infinite Earths. The crossover so epic it reached every corner of the DC multiverse. Join DC Dave,
Even Doug Adamson as we discuss the Monitor Tapes.
a Crisis on Infinite Earths podcast.
Find us on your favorite podcatcher and join the discussion at themonitortapes.com.
And we're back. And we're going to start things off here with Showcase 97, released November 15th, 1977. Written by Paul Levitz, art by Joe Staton and Joe Orlando, lettered by Ben Oda, and colored by Jerry Serp. Or Serpe. I'm not really sure how that's pronounced. But anyway, we got a really cool cover actually to open this series, as we've got Power Girl flying towards the reader, bursting out of an issue of All-Star Comics. Of course, this is the first story that's heavily featured her. So it's, kind of apropos that she's coming bursting from the pages of All-Star Comics into her own little feature. So our story opens with Power Girl bursting not from a comic, but into Central Electronics, which is currently being robbed by a gang of thugs. She comes in, starts beating up the thugs, and, as tends to be the case, they start trying to shoot at her. And even she brings up that she's been part of the Justice Society for over a year now. You'd think people would realize who she is, and that bullets will not work on her. Although, one thing this comic does here that I actually really like is it brings up the fact that when bullets bounce off someone, they're still dangerous. As one of the bullets ricocheting off of her almost hits an innocent bystander. Luckily, her Kryptonian speed is enough to catch the bullet before it does any damage. In the meantime, one of the goons attempts to escape in this big, to be honest, kind of futuristic-looking tank, but with Power Girl hot on his trail. Our criminal friend manages to get past a train just before it comes on the track, and he figures that will give him the opportunity to escape, because by the time the train gets past, he'll be long gone, and there's a bridge, so Power Girl can't just jump over the train. On the other hand, she decides to push the train back into the tracks further, which works for her, but admittedly that seems very destructive. I mean, she probably does a lot of damage to that train, and I don't know if there's passengers on it or not, or if there's just cargo. It's hard to say, but regardless, maybe not the best method. Anyway, she follows along after the guy as he takes his tank up to the top of a building, though that doesn't help him either. She quickly gets to him and finally gets a hold of him. But then he brings up that his vest is armed with an explosive, and now they're both going to die. But that's not a problem for Power Girl, as she proceeds to rip the vest off him and chuck it into the river before it can explode. And to be honest, I don't believe it does, because the last thing we see is that vest flop into the river. We don't see like an explosion out of the water or anything. So yeah, I'm not sure how her ripping this explosive device off of him managed to keep the vest, I should say, from exploding, but apparently it did. I never said these comics were, perfect in their logic. Anyway, she gets him to the police, who've already managed to capture the other members of the gang. And at that point, the pushy news media shows up and starts pretty much demanding that Power Girl tell them her story. Who she is, where she came from, all of that. And she points out that, she does not owe them an explanation. She is not obligated to tell them anything, which, is technically true. I mean, let's face it, when you're well known, people are going to want to know about your history, and you have to expect that they're going to come after you about it. But you are still not obligated to give them answers. Our reporter friend here does not agree with me. He says that the people of the city want to know her story and deserve it. So she proceeds to pick him up, place him on top of a building, and then fly off. It kind of reminds me of what Superman does to the one reporter at the beginning of the Grounded storyline, except maybe a little less scary. She was a little bit lighter to this guy than Superman was in that case. Meanwhile, we have just a quick trip to whoever is leading this gang, who's very frustrated that Power Girl has gotten in the way, and apparently this is not the first time she's done so. But he promises that this will be the last, because she's not going to live to interfere again. Meanwhile, Power Girl flies off into kind of a little secluded area of the woods to try to just be by herself, with our irritating reporter following after her in his car. She decides to take a little nap, and through her dreams we get a little flashback. This, of course, giving us Power Girl's origin, which is very similar to Supergirl's, except slightly different. Like Supergirl, she, of course, lived on the city of Kandor. But unlike with Supergirl, this Kandor did not get shrunk down and saved by Brainiac, this one was still part of Krypton. And in this case, her father, Zor-El, realizing that the elders of Krypton were not going to listen to Jor-El about Krypton's imminent destruction, started working towards trying to build a ship so that he could save himself, his wife, and their daughter Kara. Unfortunately, he came to realize that he had miscalculated his timing and was not going to have time to get the ship completed. But he would have time to complete a ship small enough for Kara herself. Thus, he finishes it. They send Kara off just before Krypton explodes. At this point, Kara wakes back up in the woods and decides to move on, having heard the sound of sirens around police headquarters. Not like the normal amount of sirens that you would expect to hear at police headquarters, but an excessive amount. So she flies off to investigate, just as our little reporter friend, who goes by the name of Vincent Andrew Wilson, gets there, very frustrated that he got there just as she left, so he's still not getting his answers. But he figures she was hanging around here for some reason. Certainly couldn't be that she just wanted a secluded place to rest. She had to have chosen this specific place for a reason. So he starts looking around, and then he sees something that shocks him. But before we can see what that is, we move on to what Power Girl is doing as she gets to police headquarters and finds more of that gang trying to break their friends out of jail and trying to still retrieve the items that they were trying to get in the first robbery, which are currently being held as evidence. Well, Power Girl bursts in, starts fighting off the gang. They've got a little more advanced weaponry this time, so you can see that it is actually affecting her, but not enough to stop her, just enough to kind of slow her down a bit. But she manages to take them out and stop them from getting what they want and escaping. She takes the goons back to the cops as more reporters show up. And the first thing they do is give the cops criticism about, well, why isn't the police department able to protect itself? Something that is brought up a lot more nowadays in comics than it was brought up then. So at that point, that kind of concept was somewhat more novel. Anyway, then they also want to talk to Power Girl and get information on her past, which she still does not want to really give. She just wants her privacy. So she proceeds to stomp the ground, making everybody stumble. Just enough to trying to send a message, though not necessarily the most successful. But that's when the reporters notice something coming. It's Vincent, and he's inside some weird robot spacesuit, shooting some type of ray at Power Girl to end the issue. This comic is pretty good. It does the job of establishing our character, getting some action from her. It gives us a backstory for her, and we get a bit of a cliffhanger with whatever this spacesuit is that Vincent has somehow gotten his hands on. So I enjoyed this story to get us started on our little Power Girl solo adventure. All right, let's get to our second issue, Showcase number 98, released actually on my birthday, December 15th of 1977. I technically wasn't born yet, but it's still my birthday. Now, this has mostly the same creative team, but there are a couple little differences, so we're going to go ahead and run through the creative team for this one again. written by Paul Levitz, penciled by Joe Staten, inked by Dick Giordano, lettered by Ben Oda, and colored by Adrian Roy. Now, the cover here features Power Girl being zapped by the robot suit with Vincent inside. Vincent looking very angry and aggressive, which is quite a contrast to the first splash page we get, where we have a very similar shot of Power Girl getting blasted. But in this case, Vincent actually looks very distressed and unhappy with the whole situation. Power Girl seems to know what this thing is, though she's not sure how Vincent ended up with it, and she tries fighting back against it, but he points out that he's not in control of this robot suit, and the damage she's doing is actually just hurting him, not actually doing anything about the suit, which begins to speak for itself, talking about how Vincent is now the tool to ensure that the robot suit and Power Girl can become one once again. Now, as Power Girl hits the ground after taking another hard shot, the cops attempt to step in and help, and I'll give them credit for that. They acknowledge that Power Girl has done a lot for them during her time with the JSA, so they want to step in and help. But of course, this being Kryptonian armor, which technically has not fully been brought up yet, but the fact that, it mentions Power Girl and the suit being one at one time, it's kind of implied that this is Kryptonian armor, which Power Girl actually then acknowledges herself, point out, yeah, you guys aren't going to be able to do a thing to that because it's Kryptonian, your weapons are useless. She manages to finally subdue the machine, get it taken down, and get Vincent out of it, which causes the machine to transform into a spaceship. And Power Girl apologizes to Vincent for him getting dragged into it and says that she's gonna take the ship and get out of there and take care of it. And then Vincent gets back to being the irritating reporter that he was in the previous issue. He starts talking about how, she owes him answers over who she is, what this ship is, and all that. And she points out that she owed him an apology, and he got it, but that is all she is giving him. So she goes to fly away, and he really gets on my nerves here as he grabs hold of her just as she jumps so that she can't throw him off because she doesn't want to risk, legitimately hurting him. Personally, I think if she went back down, all those cops that are still there could very rightly arrest Vincent, since I'm pretty sure he has no business putting his hands on her. And this isn't a, he could hurt her thing. This is very much a form of physical assault. And I'm pretty sure those cops could take him and arrest him for that. But that's not what happens here. Instead, she flies off with Vincent wrapped around her, while the cops start attempting to get things cleaned up. One of the cops, however, is clearly more than he seems. He goes to where they've got the stolen property, because again, this whole thing has been taking place in front of the police station, takes out all of the cops that are in the stolen evidence lockup, and then reveals his true identity. It's Brainwave, well-known JSA villain, who we at first see in his kind of muscular red and blue superhero-ish costume, although he pretty quickly transforms into his normal short, bald, and ugly attire. And he points out that now he's finally going to get his revenge against Power Girl. Meanwhile, we move to the woods just outside of Gotham. And Power Girl lands, gets Vincent off of her, and I'll be honest, I kind of want to smack this guy. He is a freaking jerk. She tells him that he can walk back to the city, and she's going to go about her business. And that's when he mentions that he stumbled upon the ship close by when it grabbed him. And this even surprises Power Girl. So she acknowledges that yes, there are some answers that need to be found here. That's when she gives us a bit more of her backstory, specifically about this ship, which it turns out was the same ship that she traveled from Krypton to Earth on. It's known as the Symbio ship, and it basically mentally helped to mature her as she was making her trip to Earth. It kind of reminds me of the Black Mercy from the Superman story For the Man Who Has Everything, which of course came out in 1985, so this happened well before that. Basically, it's in her head implanting all these visions and memories, basically giving her a life on Krypton as she's traveling to Earth to kind of help mature her and prepare her for her upcoming life. But the ship's AI, it turns out, has gained this belief in its programming that Power Girl and itself are meant to stay together as one. And it's at this point that the tentacles from the ship grab Power Girl and pull her inside, and then try to put her back into a dream state so that she can't fight back. Again, this is very similar to the Black Mercy from For the Man Who Has Everything. She's inside the ship and she's starting to lose herself to all these visions that the ship is giving her. And she's fighting as best she can, actually having a pretty good amount of success managing to fight against the brainwashing that the Symbio ship is giving her. It gives her all these visions of a romance, happiness on Krypton, basically anything it can to keep her inside the ship. Now at the same time, we've got Brainwave completing all of his work with all the electrical components that his men had been trying to steal in the previous issue, and he's now ready to extract his revenge. However, he has no idea where Power Girl is. But he decides, all right then, I'm going to go after the one member of the JSA whose identity has been revealed, which of course is the Flash, Jay Garrick. He is, I think at this point, the only JSA member who has revealed his secret identity to the public. So he goes, he happens to find Jay Garrick, and then, admittedly, one of the more humorous moments, because it's you'd think more people would notice this kind of thing, and I guess you could say it's because he's, being Brainwave, he's, smarter than average. But he literally at one point says, "And the man with him bears an extraordinary resemblance to Green Lantern." Yes, he is with Alan Scott, so Brainwave figures this is his opportunity to take care of not only the Flash, but the Green Lantern as well. We go back to Power Girl and Vincent, where Power Girl finally manages to bust her way out of the ship. And she grabs Vincent and starts flying away, because the ship is still in her head, but it's getting fainter the further away she gets. So she flies off with him, and they end up at the Superman Museum, which was not a good idea because that's right where the ship actually wanted her to go, and it manages to get to her again. And here's the point where Vincent actually shows some usefulness and some decency, as he's done reports on the Superman Museum, so he knows about it enough that he has the museum director break out the holographic projector and basically set up an image around the ship to look like Krypton. Now, the ship's programming can't take this because Krypton's gone. This shouldn't be here. The visions he's giving to Power Girl should be the only remnants of Krypton there is. This causes the ship to overload, finally allowing Power Girl to break free and fully destroy the ship. She acknowledges here, maybe I need to admit that sometimes I do need help, because let's face it, much of a jerk as he is, Vincent did help her out here. So they decide the two of them are going to talk, and she's going to basically let him help her learn how to accept help. And at the same time, she'll give him some of the answers that he's been looking for. And that brings us to the end of the issue. Now, this one was pretty good. I really like the symbiote ship brainwashing thing. As I said, it reminds me so much of the upcoming For the Man Who Has Everything story, and I wonder if there was some inspiration for that from this. Funny thing about the symbiote ship is, even nowadays, it is still commonly used in comics. Actually, Power Girl's current series has featured the symbiote ship in a couple of cases. So it's almost like her number one rogue is the symbiote ship. But yeah, I enjoyed the action of this. I enjoyed the suspense of her trying to fight against the ship. I liked the side stuff we were building with Brainwave, which of course we know is going to come into play as we continue on. Really, the most frustrating part of it was Andrew Vincent. He is just like the worst. But unfortunately, let's face it, we're not getting rid of him. At least not for a while. But yeah, so far this has been a fun little mini-series. We've got one more issue to look at, but before we get to that, let's take a little break and check out another promo for another podcast that you should check out.
1938. Americans are climbing out of the Great Depression, even as another world war looms on the horizon. Murderers and madmen prey on the helpless and the innocent.
In this time, two restless souls emerge as lights in the darkness.
Insomniac Wesley Dodds, haunted by unspeakable dreams, driven to fight evil as a masked vigilante.
Socialite Diane Belmont, searching for purpose, drawn into a world of mystery and danger.
The wicked beware, for when Wesley and Diane come together, no one can escape the Sandman's dark dream.
Justice Society presents The Sandman Slept Here, covering Vertigo's Sandman Mystery Theater, one story at a time. Hosted by Ryan Daly,
Paul Ken,
And Max Romero.
Find it on the Justice Society Presents feed.
Part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Dream a little dream of me.
All right, and now it's time for the final part of our story, showcase number 99. This one was released on January 17th, 1978, written by Paul Levitz, penciled by Joe Staton, inked by Dick Giordano, lettered by Shelley Lefferman, and colored by Adrian Roy. And I gotta say, I think this might be my favorite cover of the three. This one features Power Girl, Flash, and Green Lantern, each in these plastic bubbles. Green Lantern's, of course, has wood banding around it to prevent him from using his powers, while Brainwave, or technically Brainwave's hands, are pressing a button on a machine, getting ready to do some dastardly evil. And our story officially opens with Brainwave going back just a little bit to before he went after Flash and Green Lantern, as he's pointing out that Power Girl has apparently foiled his plans more than any other JSA member. Which is weird, because Power Girl, both in continuity and in the real world, has only been around for a little over a year. And Brainwave has been a JSA villain for quite a bit longer than that. How has she done more to foil his plans than any other JSA member? I mean, I get this is her story, so of course, we gotta make the villain specifically after her. But anyway, he has plans on getting his revenge on her, but he still wants to get the rest of the JSA, so, as we mentioned in the previous issue, he decides to go after the Flash because he already knows the Flash's identity. This, as we saw in the previous issue, leads to him going after both Jay Garrick and Alan Scott. Meanwhile, we do cut to not Power Girl, but, for the first time ever, Karen Starr. Yes, thanks to help from Vincent, Power Girl has officially created a secret identity, that of computer specialist Karen Starr. And how has she become a computer specialist? Well, it turns out that Wonder Woman supplied a machine that implants memories and mental abilities into people, and thus, Power Girl has suddenly become a computer expert, and she's in the process of getting hired for a new job, again with help from Vincent, which is good because Vincent came off horrible in the first 2 issues, so they kind of needed to do something to make him a little more likable, and really they do a much better job. He is not as pushy, he's helpful, surprising that he's helping her put together a secret identity. You'd think as a reporter he would not want to help her keep a secret, but hey, whatever works, right? Now, about this time, her new boss finds out that apparently Keystone City, the home of the Flash, has disappeared. This, of course, seems rather odd, so Karen rushes off, changes into Power Girl, and goes to investigate, where she finds some military men staring at a huge crater where Keystone City used to be. They're trying to figure out what's going on as a giant mental image of Brainwave's head appears before them. To be honest, it's almost as big as Brainwave's actual head. But anyway, he says that he wants the JSA members surrendered to him, or he will destroy more cities the way he did Keystone City. Well, Power Girl rushes in, and Brainwave decides, well, this is perfect. He wants her anyway, so he sends these his men in these like robot ship things after her. They zap a couple of the soldiers, causing them to disappear, leaving a little crater behind, just like what happened to Keystone City. Well, Power Girl fights back and manages to take out the robot machines. But unfortunately, Brainwave still has the advantage, and since he now knows that she has seen what his machines can do, he tells her that if she doesn't surrender to him, he will destroy other cities. Now, of course, she's not going to let that happen, so she agrees to stand still, and the last remaining of those little robot machines gets ready to zap her. And one of the soldiers proceeds to say to her, "Young woman, history will remember this valiant sacrifice forever." Because you see, we're not going to try to do anything to help, prevent you from dying. We're just going to let you die, but tell you that we will honor your death. Good job, guys. Anyway, they zap her, she disappears, and that's when we fully learn that what's happening is the things getting zapped are being teleported away to this kind of dimensional limbo, is what Brainwave refers to it as. Now, inside this little dimensional limbo is where we see Flash and Green Lantern, who, funny enough, when we saw them in the previous issue, when Brainwave was going to capture them, they were in their civilian guise. Yet here, they're both in costumes. So all I can think is Brainwave managing to get a hold of them, but then being like, "No, this doesn't feel right. Okay, listen, you two, put your costumes on. We have to do this properly." Anyway, Green Lantern's in a plastic bubble with wood banding around it, and Jay is in his own bubble, with a vibration thing, I guess is the best way to phrase it, to prevent him from using his powers. Power Girl gets zapped inside a bubble of her own, which Brainwave says is strong enough to ensure that she can't break out. And now he's going to go through the process of getting all the other JSA members and having everybody captured. And then Power Girl proceeds to kick her way out of her bubble, so I guess it wasn't strong enough to hold her after all. Well, the goons rush in and of course are completely useless because she's a Kryptonian. What are these guys going to do to her? So Brainwave brings out this weird giant creature. It's kind of difficult to describe him. There's an element of him that I think kind of resembles the Brood from X-Men, mostly in the teeth and eyes. It's got kind of a head and brain like the Martians from Mars Attacks. This green, kind of scaly, kind of furry creature. It's very difficult to describe this thing. But anyway, it goes after Power Girl. They have a bit of a fight. She manages to subdue it, even with the goons stepping in, and she eventually manages to get the creature and the goons into their own little private bubble. So, with no one else to protect him, Brainwave is pretty much out of luck here. Power Girl warns him that he'd better release Flash and Green Lantern, which he agrees to do, but says that he will not put Keystone City back unless they agree to let him go free. And Green Lantern and Flash decide no deal and proceed to put him in his own little bubble created by Green Lantern's ring. But they're still not sure what to do about Keystone City, because Flash and Green Lantern are both very smart, but neither one of them are really computer experts. Luckily, turns out somebody else here is, and Power Girl manages to figure the computer out and get Keystone City back to its proper place on Earth, saving the day, and everybody's happy. This was a fun way to complete the story. In a way, it was kind of separate from the first two, other than Brainwave being involved and Jay and Alan being captured. But with the first two stories being about the symbiote ship and such, this one seemed almost separate, but it still kind of fit together with the first two issues. One thing I will say is we do see a lot of the insecurity that Power Girl has, and it's something I didn't bring up in the actual talk here, but when Power Girl gets herself free, Flash suggests that, hey, great, get us free too so we can help you. And she says, no, I want to do this myself. One of the things that Power Girl had right from the start was an insecurity about being seen as weaker than men. She really gets into it with Wildcat a lot in her early days, and I feel like there was a lot of, I can't free them, I have to do this myself to prove that I can. And it works out, of course, because this is her story. But yeah, it's a continued struggle that she has, and a level of insecurity, which does kind of humanize her in a way, which is pretty talented for somebody who's not human. But in general, I really enjoyed all three of these stories. I feel this was a really good showcase of Power Girl as a character, and I'm glad that I had a chance to sit down and really delve into these three issues. But that's all I've got for this little discussion. If you enjoyed my video, please give me a like and subscribe. It does a lot to help me out. And I definitely encourage you to check out some of the other projects being put out for JSApril. You can find them on Twitter, Facebook, here on YouTube, by checking out the hashtag JSApril and see all sorts of wonderful blogs, podcasts, and other such things looking at the wonder of the Justice Society of America. That's all I've got, so until next time.